This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
As of today, you can now go to D&D Beyond and get the Grim Hollow Player Pack.
I didn't know that the Valican Clans material was going to get in there.
We're basically doing a refresh of the entire Grim Hollow campaign guide and the player's guide.
Is it going to refresh to match the 2024 stuff?
Yes.
Oh!
We've had a week of previews from the new player's handbook and a little bit from the DMG as well. We're going to dive deep into it.
It's basically taking a bunch of my homebrew and going, we're making this the official PHP now. I'm like, cool, that works.
It's fine.
There are a few little bits and pieces where I'm like, yeah, like take it or leave it, like whatever. But mostly the stuff that they've revealed, I'm pretty hyped about.
All that and more right now.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. Holy sound. That is the most accurate air horn I've ever heard anybody make with their mouth.
Being a human jukebox is one of my talents. I'm not exactly, what's his name from the Police Academy movies?
Michael Winslow.
Michael Winslow. Yeah, I'm not exactly his level, but I am very good at, I am often touted as being very impressive with my ability to make noises like arrows sticking into trees.
Completely caught me off guard. You know, getting back on guard. My name is Ben Byrne. If this is the first time you've listened to the Lorecast, joined as always by Shawn, Merwin, Dael.
Nailed it, mate. You're nailing it.
Let's try that again.
Yeah, I'm doing well this morning. My name is Ben Byrne, joined as always by Shawn, Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, and this week joining us, Robert Hartley from Viva La Dirt League. Robert, welcome to the Eldritch Lorecast.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
For folks that don't know or may not know your work, where can folks find you? What might they know you from?
So I'm Robert Hartley, or Robert Hartley GM on all of the different platforms. Thankfully, I was lucky enough to get that handle on everything, because that's important, Dael, to get.
I don't need. You come into my home.
Robert Hartley GM on all the platforms. I'm most well known for being the DM for a comedy group called Viva La Dirt League. That's New Zealand based but worldwide audience. They have a sketch comedy channel that has coming up to 7 million subscribers. And then they've got a secondary channel that's specifically for TTRPG content with me that has 430,000 subscribers. So we're doing pretty well on YouTube. That's what I'm most well known for. But I do all sorts of stuff all over the internet, basically D&D content creation.
I highly recommend folks go check out Viva, because I found them, I think, right when they were starting to blow up big with their Epic NPC Man, which was the show that I first started, but also Bored, because I worked in EB Games, and so I was just like, that's me.
The retail series became big because everybody could relate to working retail and having crappy customers and stuff. We've since run a couple of one-shots as their board characters as well.
Oh, really?
TTRPGs that I've made up for one-shots in like a sci-fi setting where they get sucked into a video game or whatever.
I should go check those out. All right, let us jump into this. As of today, if not yesterday, you can now go to D&D Beyond and get the Grim Hollow Player Pack, which is the first player pack that we're putting up of Grim Hollow content onto D&D Beyond. And I'm pretty excited about this because we're kind of drawing content from multiple different Grim Hollow books of player options for people to use. I've just realized as I'm saying this, none of you have any idea what I'm talking about because I didn't end up putting it on the run sheet. So I'm just going to give you the rundown.
Yeah, for the folks at home, the run sheet just says redacted and then a big blank spot.
Yeah. Sorry, the recording time and the release time.
I thought we were going to talk about the concept of redacting things. I've got a whole
we need to talk
essay
about
censorship.
Well, speaking of Cloak and Dagger, Grim Hollow, we are including in this pack 2 new species, Wexelkind and the Disembodied, which I'm super excited about. 2 of my favorites, to be honest, because I got to have a lot of say of what goes into this pack. We've got 6 subclasses, including the Inquisition Domain Cleric and the Zeal Paladin, Oath of Zeal, which is the kind of Arcanist Inquisition. Incredibly, they are unyielding in their doctrine as faith-based subclasses. The Misfortune Bringer Rogue and the College of Requiem's Bards. And then what I'm kind of really excited about is the Path of the Carrion Crow Barbarian and the Bladebreaker Fighter, which are from Valican Clans, and they both include martial maneuvers, which are like a new spell type abilities that martial classes, in fact, all classes got in the Valakan Clan's Raiders Guide to Valakar. We've brought those to D&D Beyond, which was kind of a funny story because we were telling Jay from D&D Beyond, this is all the content we kind of would love to throw in here. And I brought up Valakar almost offhandedly. And Jay was like, give me a look at that. Give me a look at that Valakar. And I was like, all right, here you go. He's like, yeah, I reckon we could do this. Let's get 2 of these in here. And I was like, all right, let's do it. So they're in there. We've also got 10 spells mixed. I tried to make a real mix of these spells between the really powerful feeling, like Ride the Lightning, where you turn into a lightning bolt and then teleport, and then everybody takes damage along the line of your teleportation, to the really uncomfortable and creepy, like Flents, where you can each turn carve off a slice of your enemy just using magic, kind of Ramsay Bolton them with magic, is what that spell brings to mind. And we kind of did a similar thing with the 12 magic items that are in there, being the arc rifle, which is a gun that shoots lightning bolt, or the bow of 4, which is like an elemental bow that does 2d8 of elemental damage. But we've also got things in there like the Ring of Hidden Desire, which all it does is you have the ability to learn the darkest desires of of someone that you're talking to, which is not powerful. It doesn't give you any advantage in combat. It's just creepy. And it opens really cool role play possibilities, which I really like about it. I've been talking a lot here, but considering you guys don't have the run sheet, I don't know if you've got anything to say. So
It all sounds pretty grim, to be honest.
That's the goal.
He said the thing.
I didn't know that the Valakan Clans material was going to get in there, so I didn't know that they would be able to put in the
martial maneuvers.
Yeah, the martial maneuvers. I think that is great. That was something that we were very excited about adding to the Valakan Clans book and adding to the game to sort of give wizards a chance to be more martial and giving fighters and martial characters a chance to do a little bit more mystical,
to be more wizard,
supernatural kinds of things, to add a little flexibility to people's experiences. The fact that they were able to put those 2 in means that system has started to go into there, because it uses dice and it uses a different currency, if you will.
I really love the theming of these 2 as well. The Valakar obviously being a Nordic-inspired part of Etheros as the setting. The Path of the Carrion Raven is based on this saga that was told about a raven who could shapeshift into different animals and led a band of adventurers to slay a great monster. For the deal of if the party succeeded, this raven would get to eat the monster's heart, and that just feels so. It feels like something straight out of Norse myth to me.
It's pretty metal.
It's pretty metal, and the art for it is pretty metal as well. Of like this blood-covered barbarian with an axe, kind of their armor shaped almost like the feathers of a raven. But the things that you can do with it it's kind of totem barbarian-ish, but it gives you a lot of different options turn to turn.
Wild Heart Barbarian, thank you very much.
Yeah, Ben, the Wild Heart.
Sorry. I'm not down with my 2024 lore quite yet.
Can you tell us more about the, I forget what it's called, Depression Inducer, Misery Maker. the Misery Maker, the Sorrow Bringer, whatever you call the rogue.
The Misfortune Bringer, the rogue, yes.
That's him. I feel like most rogues stabbing you in the back with sneak attacks, bringing you misfortune. So what is that?
In game design and gameplay terms, think of debuffing, right? It is the thing that not only will it stab you in the back. Also, it is depression
inducing.
But it will also make it harder for you to not be stabbed by all your rogue's friends. Makes it harder for their victims to escape the beating that is about to be laid down upon them.
Thematically, puts out misfortune upon anybody who crosses its path. It's like the black cat rogue, if you will.
Oh, that's neat.
Cool. Yeah, I like that.
Applying jinxes to different people that debuff them.
Yep, there are a variety of small curses that the rogue can put up on someone to...
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
Yeah.
I think Depression Inducer might be a better name if it's not locked in yet.
Yeah, consider it.
Well, we'll consider it for our next bit of news, because that's not the only thing. You can go to D&D Beyond right now and grab the player pack if you want a bit of a taste of Grimhollow, of what Grimhollow has to offer. I'll put a link somewhere around here. It'll probably be that way. I can never remember which way the links are, but they're somewhere around here.
To the sides?
I don't know. It's in perspective as well. I'm off
The
in the side.
description
Anyway,
has been below the video for 1,000 years. I think we can settle on
we
that
can
now.
embed links in the video, so they might appear up there or there, but I'm not sure which direction it is.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wait, we're
Yeah,
reversed.
no,
Oh,
exactly,
no. Oh, no,
exactly.
my own
Now you're
hubris.
confused as
Oh,
well.
how the mighty has fallen.
Speaking of mighty, that is not the only thing. We also have, and this is absolutely massive, bit of Grim Hollow news. Folks know we've got a Kickstarter coming out in October. A video released earlier this week on the Ghostfire main channel talking about what that Kickstarter will be. And we're basically doing a refresh of the entire Grim Hollow campaign guide and the player's guide in a single Kickstarter. So we're going to have all our player content in one book instead of kind of split across the two, which they are currently. We didn't know we were going to get to make a player's guide when we made the campaign guide.
Is it going to refresh to match the 2024 stuff?
Yes, it will.
Oh!
Which is what I'm super excited about. And that's why I was thinking about the rogue, the highway rider rogue.
Yeah.
Their quick shot ability is going to have to be a little bit rethought because the way that it functions at the moment might not work super well with the new rules.
Yeah.
We've got to think about how weapon mastery is going to work with the paladins and the barbarians and the fighters. How will a bulwark fighter be able to make the best use out of things like weapon mastery? There's new exciting spells, how a feat's going to work. And honestly, one of the things I'm really excited about as well is the heritage system, which is why I brought up Scott Fitzgerald Grey earlier. The heritage system, which we've had in Aurora, we had it in Valican Clans, and we had it in the Ethereal Expanse setting guide. We're bringing it to Grim Hollow. Rob, if you're not familiar, basically this system is a way of choosing your species, but you get to freely pick what your features are. You get, I think it's 6 or 8 options.
Like a custom lineage situation. Like
basically that.
Maybe
and there's kind of
fins and wings.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, you got a swim speed and a fly speed and nothing else because that's too powerful.
There's sort of suggestions around like if you want to play an elf, this is the typical traits an elf may have. If you want to play a disembodied, these are the typical traits a disembodied may have.
Is it like point space thing? Do you put value on like how powerful it is to have a fly speed at level 1 and then how powerful it is to have dark vision and stuff like that, and then each costs different points?
Only to the point where most of them there will be a 1-point trait and then a 2-point trait that is a more powerful version. And we give examples of Game Master. If you want to run this sort of campaign, we would suggest allowing 8 points. And we have categories for each of the traits. So this is sort of a role-playing trait. This is more of an exploration trait. Yeah. And then that's
how I've thought about doing mine in the future, is like having all of the races to prevent having like, oh, here are the 10 races you can play as, and then a supplemental comes out and you're like, here's 5 more, and then here's 10 more, and then here's 12, and then by the time you've finished, you've got thousands of them and they're all basically the same.
Yeah, it really creates the opportunity for really nuanced expressions, I think, of lineage and upbringing and where your character comes from, which I really like, but it also creates opportunities for self-expression and creativity in the way that you want to lock those traits together. We have the Dreamer as a species in Grim Hollow, these folk that were trapped underground for unknown millennia. They've been asleep all that time in this catatonic state that has kept them safe from some cataclysm that first put them underground. But now that they've woken up, they've been asleep for so long, they don't know what is memory and what is dreams. They've been dreaming this entire time. And so they have these features where they can tap into the dreams of others that you would take if you want to play a Dreamer. But if you want to play, let's say, a Wexelkin, which is kind of like a living puppet, a nightmare Pinocchio, as we call it in the office, who was used as a changeling, but you still have some connection to the Feywild, you might take that Dreamer trait and reflavor it as, because of your connection with the Feywild and the realm of dreams, you can also access, dreams in a way that's similar to a Dreamer. And
I love that your brain went to, what's an alternative version of this? Ah, yes, a nightmare puppet that's connected to Feywild. I was just thinking psychics, but psychics, nightmare puppets.
Sure.
I was thinking of Santa because he sees you when you're sleeping.
Okay, that's going to be our Valican one-shot. All of our subclasses that were in the player's guide are going to be recreated for the 2024 rules, but we're also going to do a new subclass for each of the core classes. We've got our Monster Hunter class coming. It's going to be revised for the 2024 rules from its playtest. We've got the heritage system. We've got transformations are going to be in the player's guide now, and we are going to create new transformations and kind of review how they work. We've got magic items that are going to be in the campaign guide. We've got advice for GMs about how to transform your game into a more dark fantasy world. 5e is heroic fantasy at its core. Is becoming more that with the 2024 rules update. We want to give GMs tools and rules to make their world equally as dangerous, to try and level the playing field between the players and the monsters a little bit more. So links, again, somewhere around here. I don't know. I'll point at it eventually.
I'll say nothing. I learned my lesson.
The editor has to pause you and screenshot at the one moment that you're actually
exactly the right time.
And then look, one down in the doobly-doo just for safety as well. There'll be links everywhere. So that's the redacted Grim Hollow news. We're really excited. I hope you're excited. D&D Beyond, all that stuff. Back to the show. An edit seamless transition. I do have to ask because we've had a week of previews from the new Player's Handbook and a little bit from the DMG as well. We're going to dive deep into it, but just quick round circle, starting with Rob. First impressions, me likey or me no likey?
Me likey. Me notice that it is mostly things that I have already, changes that I've already made in my games anyway. It's basically taking a bunch of my homebrew and going, we're making this the official PHP now. I'm like, cool, that works. And then there's lots of things in it that I'm like, not going to be using that. But yeah,
fair.
We'll get into that.
I'm bad at Twitch, so we're getting raided. But yay, welcome Raiders!
Welcome Raiders.
Is this the appropriate reaction?
Woo! Anytime Ben has to acknowledge official functions of the platform, he gets flustered. So we must be kind to him in this difficult time.
I'm basically 60 years old in Twitch years. In all honesty. But Dael Kingsmill, what about yourself? Are you enjoying the reveals so far?
I am enjoying the reveal so far. I broadly speaking, really like the stuff that they've revealed. It's all stuff that I'm excited to get in and use. There are a few little bits and pieces where I'm take it or leave it, whatever. Mm-hmm. But mostly the stuff that they've revealed, I'm pretty hyped about.
Okay.
I really like the fight. I'm not saying much because I know we're going to get into it in depth. That's why I'm holding myself back.
We're going to dive deep. Just before we do, Shawn Merwin, I know there's one change that you are gnashing your teeth about, but other than that, which we're going to dive into concerning backgrounds, me likey or me no likey?
I'm going to reserve my judgment until I read the whole thing, and then I go on and totally judge it. So obviously, I have not reserved my judgment. It's fine. It's good in some places. It's not good in other places. And we will get into it here momentarily. And then I will vent my spleen across the internet.
I'm excited for your spleen venting. Across the internet?
Yeah, I feel like I have two spleens at this point, so there's a lot coming.
And wet.
Right. Well, speaking of which, let us dive deep in. I have to say, me likey so far. The changes are kind of bigger than I was necessarily expecting in subtle ways. I was like, oh, okay, I like that. That's a good change, and that's a significant change. But obviously not so big that it's not the same room with the furniture rearranged within, to draw on an earlier analogy that we used. Let's dive in. Let's start with I don't even know where to start. I'm going to start with Shawn's spleen bleeding because
why wait for a spleen bleeding?
Well, I think it's going to be a juicy
topic. If you've been promised a spleen bleeding, you can't. Everybody knows about storytelling. It's Chekhov's spleen, I think it's called.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly.
Spleen bleeding. We need to get to.
Merwin's
you got to get to it quick.
Yeah.
Well, this is kind of tied into a couple of things. What I'm going to jump into, and it's an odd place to start, but it's backgrounds, right? Because backgrounds give you.
I think that's the only logical place to start.
Yeah, exactly.
Makes
Right,
sense.
we're going back to the start of the story.
Wait, I think they're calling them origins, right? I think they're calling it. I think, that chapter is called
The whole
origins because you
chapter
choose your
is
species. You choose your species and your background in the origin. Because the way that they've described it is, you start by choosing what class you are, and then you
Right.
work backwards and think, how did I become this class, by looking at your background, and then you work backwards even further by saying, how did I become that background, by looking at what species you were born as.
Right.
Interesting way to do
that
it.
makes sense. Having it worded like that, it sounds a lot closer to Tales of the Valiant's kind of heritage lineage system, where they
Yeah.
split it into two. But I don't know, but I believe they have like backgrounds separate to both of those two things, I think.
Right.
Anyway, we're not talking about Tales of the Valiant. We're talking about New 5e. So you get your origin feat, or your beginning feat. They have a special name for it because they've split the feats out, and feats much more important. Can't ignore them now. And the other thing that you get is your ability score increases based on your background. Now, there is a little bit of flexibility in this because you get 3 choices and you can put 2 in one and 1 in another, or you can put 3 across all of them, but it is a constraint. Can't have farmers who want to be wizards anymore because they didn't study hard enough, I suppose, on the farm.
We got rid of bioessentialism by taking away those ability score increases and decreases from species. And we went, yay, yay. And now we hate farmers for some reason. Farmers are all stupid.
They went, this is kind of bioessentialism, so we get rid of it. And everybody was largely touting that as a success. And then they go, but we are going to restrict classes to coming from certain, optimized classes, I should say.
Right.
Because my take on it is, I'm not entirely against the idea. I think it's strange to put all of your ability score improvement from background. The way that I would run it, and the way that I probably will, because every time something like this happens, I get a little bit closer to the inevitability of eventually writing my own TTRPG.
So relatable.
Eventually I have to write my own TTRPG. I homebrew so much that eventually I'm not playing Dungeons & Dragons anymore. But the way that I would do it is, I would give you a +1 to a particular stat of your choice from your background, a +1 from your species, and a +1 from your class, and like your primary stat in your class. Because yes, if you've trained as a background as a soldier, you're more likely to have a buff to your strength, constitution, or dexterity. And so yes, giving a constriction around that makes sense to me. But don't tie the whole thing to it, because what species you are also makes sense to me. And yes, Goliaths are probably going to be stronger than hobbits or whatever. So giving a +1 because of your species also makes sense. But then also, you choose to be a rogue, so you're probably going to have a +1 from Dex because you've spent a lot of your job doing roguish things. And that's how I would split it as a +1 from this, a +1 from that, and a +1 from this, because you're doing 3 different choices and you're taking 3 different +1s. I don't see why that's not the way to do it.
And it's because I understand where they're coming from with this method. I don't think the method is inherently without merit, but it does exactly like you were saying. It comes to the same kind of problem at the end of the day, which is this idea of, there's the freedom to do what you want and to be like, oh, yes, I was a humble farmer and then I became a wizard. Absolutely, you can do that. But like you're saying, it is discouraged because it is not optimized. It's a matter of kind of, it's not a stick, but you're not getting a carrot, and someone else is getting a carrot just because they're towing the cliched line or whatever, and so that's exactly part of the problem that came with the sort of bioessentialist kind of thing that accidentally came about with the previous version, which is, of course you can be an orcish wizard, but none of the things you get for being an orc encourage you to do that. They kind of discourage you to do that because they are so based in this concept of physicality. And so you end up with this weird, even though there is technically the freedom to make other choices, you get funneled in the direction just by, the little bonuses.
And I think it's, I've never been against that as an idea, basically, because I'm saying if you want to be an orcish wizard, you're already making the choice of, I want to play against type. And so the mechanics showing that you're playing against type, like having to fight against the mechanics, is also the same as fighting against the type. So if you want to play against type, you shouldn't be optimized. because you're making
type?
that choice to not play an optimized character.
Whose type are we talking about? Are we talking about, right? You gave as an example for soldier, you're going to have strength, constitution, and dexterity, as if there are no soldiers who plan or who have tactics or who do things other than fight. So it's just taking one assumption, and it could be an assumption of our world, or it could be an assumption of the game worlds that we're used to, but it's still putting a type on a thing where what we should want as a game design world is letting people play whatever they want and not, quote unquote, suffer because of those choices. They should be able to play an orc wizard who is from an established world where orcs are the intelligentsia. Orcs are the ones that did these things. And so it's making an assumption
about what the game setting is by saying the orc wizard is against type in the first place. It's like, well, no, maybe this is a setting where orc wizard. But I mean, at that point, you're getting into the homebrew of like, if you are a setting where that's the case, then your DM's just as easy to say, oh, in my world, you can do this, this, and this.
That's very true, except that then you are setting up expectations. You can set up expectations of players against game masters. You can set up people who say, well, the book tells me how to play and I'm going to play like I'm told. And the book sometimes has to give permission for, and maybe they do. I don't know. Maybe they do say, do whatever you want, game master. Here's our world, or here's the way we see it. And hopefully they do that to sort of sand down that rough edge and let people get into the game that they want.
I see that.
And it's kind of the curse, once again, in a few different ways, of this kind of really broad scope that D&D and Wizards deal with, right? They're dealing in trying to sell something to everybody. And so you end up with this weird mishmash of trying to incorporate all these different fantasies and what counts as what. But at the same time, it's also like in the system, this breadth that they'd really have to go in and completely rebuild if they wanted to take away this kind of, like these are applying to broad abilities rather than specific skills. And even if they are, like even where they do reference specific skills, even where you do get bonuses to specific skills versus ability scores, even then those skills are really broad skills. It's your athletics sort of skill, and that covers a huge amount of ground. So you can't even get into the nitty gritty of like what is covered by those individual, because no matter what you're doing, the system is broad, the genre is broad, and there's a lot of benefit to that, but these are the places where you really start to kind of hit issues.
I think some of the pushback against setting background to be choosing from 3 options is by making 1 or 2 of your stats significantly more powerful than the other stats. By having the concept of a primary and a secondary stat that you must be good at in order to have a playable character, it's a problem, because like having a class where it's like, if you have a suboptimized strength, you're basically unplayable as that character. That's where the problem comes from, because I saw people saying, so paladin acolytes aren't a viable option anymore because the primary stat is a strength, and strength isn't one of the acolyte abilities. And so I'm forced to take a +1 into intelligence or wisdom, which is useless as a paladin. And I think the problem comes from the fact that that wisdom and intelligence are useless as a paladin. Like, wisdom shouldn't be a useless stat for anyone, and neither should intelligence. If intelligence was more useful for everybody to take, it wouldn't be seen as being suboptimal to be forced to take a point in intelligence.
I have a question as we've been milling this over, because when I first heard that backgrounds were going to give you your ability score increase, I and Shawn and I had discussed this a little bit already. We were spitting poison. We were just like, what? They fixed it in Tasha's and now they've completely gone back again. And then I had a bit of a think about it, and I was like, oh, look, it is still, there's more customizability here because there's 3 choices and you can +1 in all, or there's some level of customizability. And it makes sense in some capacity because, you can't you can't become a doctor if you didn't go to university, right?
Yeah.
Now that might not be the structure of
That's
your
what you
campaign
think.
world, but
Dr. Kingsmill, difference.
Give me a knife.
But I have two questions here. One's based on a question from the chat. Metman Mitch, said hopefully they still have a customized background option that was in the UA. I think they mentioned that there
have
would
it.
be.
They have it, but it's in the DMG, which I think is a nuisance. They should put it in the PHB because the PHB should have the 16 options of like, this is the class, this is the backgrounds we've already got, and then here's how to make your own. Because it's the player-facing side of things, but they've hidden that in the Dungeon Master's Guide.
Because that was always technically an option in the 2014 rules, but I don't think I ever played in a game, maybe once or twice, where I had a player ask me if they could invent their own background, and I was like, yeah, cool, no problem. Most other people want to kind of choose an option.
For once in my life, I can say I'm that person who used that all the time, not just as a player, where I was constantly like, none of these fit and I have to make my own. But also as a DM, regularly, I would just talk to my players about what they wanted their character to be, and they'd look at the backgrounds and go, I don't know, maybe this one, and I would go, you know what? We're gonna make you a custom one. We're gonna make you something else. We're gonna call it this.
I exclusively use the custom option.
Yeah.
I exclusively use the custom option because of how many. It was overwhelming to look on a D&D Beyond app, and you click on the backgrounds drop down, and there's like 1,060 backgrounds to choose from, and at that point, I'm like. All I'm doing is going through until I find the exact combination that I want of which bonuses, which skill set do I get, and so I just exclusive. And because background in 2014 one was so little to do with what your character was, it gave you a couple of skills and a language proficiency or something, and that's all that the background is, and then you never refer to it again.
But the feature was always kind of weak source.
You get free room and board somewhere.
Yeah, it's always you get free room and board. There's like 3 backgrounds that didn't give you free room and board somewhere. And so that always ended up like on D&D Beyond, it's a nightmare when you're going through.
You learned something.
Talk to DM about
what you learned.
Well, his Acquisitions Incorporated, we made our backgrounds very different. Like the plaintiff, if you were a plaintiff suing Acquisitions Incorporated, you got some different background features.
Dude, love that. That's what the power of a strong theme can give you.
Exactly.
But no, on D&D Beyond, it's always a nightmare going through and picking your background feature as well. So like I would just not do, because it just gives you the title of it. And I never remember what the titles of those background features are. So I would just end up writing my own thing, which makes it kind of another layer of inaccessible, just because not every DM or player is going to do that.
Even the Adventurers League went to a system where you could create your own backgrounds just to let people do the thing. And as we've said, there wasn't a lot of heft to it anyway. So it became pretty standard.
I think the real question will be, how easy is it in D&D Beyond to create your own background? Because I know you can create homebrew things in D&D Beyond currently, and I imagine backgrounds is probably one of those, but I would think maybe in the next iteration of whatever D&D Beyond looks like, maybe it's like a form fillable part of the backgrounds where you can pick from a drop list and it kind of fills it out for you, or you can just go in and kind of fill it out yourself to customize your own background in a way that is player facing. My other quick question is, because you get a feat with that background, can you take the ability score improvement feat with your background and just maximize your abilities?
I don't think so, because they've split feats into 3 different tiers now. There's origin feats that are specific to the ones you can take in your background. Then there's the regular feats, and then there's epic feats that you only get from 19th level above, like boons or something. And so the origin feats probably don't include the ability score improvement feat. Which sure. Although how locked off are those? Because I believe I remember Jeremy or Chris saying in one of those videos that was the case, but that you could negotiate with your GM, which you can negotiate anything with your GM. So that's kind of a meaningless statement, right? Yeah. But
I love that phrase.
Again, in D&D Beyond, like, as a player, would I be able to just choose whatever feat I want? Is it going to give me the full list, or is it only going to give me the list in D&D Beyond of what I'm meant to be able to choose from?
Because how do you code into D&D Beyond I've negotiated with my DM and he says it's okay for me to take this? Like, is that toggleable click box that you're given the list of the origin feats, and then underneath it, at the bottom there's a tick box, and if you tick that, it says I've talked to my DM and he wants me to take a different feat, and then it shows you all the other feats. Maybe something like that.
All right, let's jump into. We'll stay broad for the second before we start drilling down into the classes. The other two things that I think are interesting, and these are examples of what I think is an incredibly small change, but I think is going to have big impacts, and I really like it for what it's going to implicate in my game. The first is they've changed how surprise works. So there's no longer a big kind of almost free round of combat for the group that has surprise, so to speak. I know surprise rules are technically there's no such thing as surprise in a surprise round, whatever. It's changed so that if you are surprised, you have disadvantage on initiative. That's nice and simple. The other thing is heroic inspiration, which is no longer advantage on a D20 dice roll, which is what inspiration was in 2014. It is now a reroll, but what I really like about it is that it's a reroll on any dice.
Anything. Even damage.
Right? Even healing.
What I want to know the exact wording of is if you are rolling like fireball and you've got 8d6, is the heroic inspiration a reroll of all 8d6, or you pick a dice of the d6 and roll that one?
I suspect it's going to be just one die.
Yeah.
Just based on, I don't know, their sort of pussyfooting around the rerolls of damage dice for sorcerers in the 2014 version. Not to say that they're, sticking to that kind of a thing, but I just feel like there's a precedent for them taking the coward's path.
So could you re-roll percentile dice? Do you have to reroll the 10s and the 1s?
Do you have to reroll one of them?
Yeah, it's a percentile roll.
You make a wild magic surge and you're like, I got a 14. And then you look at the table and you're like, okay, so what's the 24? What's the 34? What's the 54? And then what's the 11, 12, 13? You go through the different options and which is better for me to reroll?
It's almost like you know my players.
But broadly, I think it's a cool little change, because I think that's going to help alleviate to some extent this ever-present problem of the underwhelming crit, where you roll a crit and then you roll a 2 on your damage die.
Yeah.
But maybe not if you have to keep the second roll, which is most likely.
I had this discussion with someone recently. Scott Fitzgerald Gray was designing something for us, and talked about how they didn't like when you re-roll a dice, you have to stick with the second result. And I was like, well, don't roll a dice. Just give. If you want to just keep re-rolling until you get a result you like,
I think it's a failure of English there. I think when they say you have to stick with the second result, is not saying you can't keep re-rolling. It's saying you can't go with your first choice. So if you roll a 4 on your damage dice and you're like, I can probably do better, and then you roll a 2, you can't go, I'll go with the 4. They're saying, you have to take the 2 because you re-rolled into the 2.
This was in the context of like a not Great Weapon Master, but the what was previously a fighting style, 2-weapon fight, not 2-weapon fighting, the one with the big weapons.
Yeah, it's something that sounds like Great Weapon Master.
Yes.
Yeah. Basically, like if you roll a 1 or 2 on damage, you can roll it again. You have to stick with the second result, even if it's a 1 or 2 again. But this is maybe a wargamer philosophy thing of like, I don't mind, but I can see how people would be underwhelmed if they rolled a 1 or 2 again. If
it was meant to be re-roll again and again and again until you don't roll a 1 or a 2, you would just, instead of rolling a d8, you'd roll a d6 plus 2.
Well, I just think
that d6 plus 2 would be a d8 where you can't roll it ones or twos.
The other person in this conversation, it feels like a very sort of a platonic kind of discussion that's happening here. I feel like I'm building the person that we're discussing against, but. I feel like they were just saying, if you roll again and it is lower, you should be able to take the higher. Like it should work like advantage. Which
if you are better, at this, why are you getting worse? With the roll? Yes,
I think basically it comes down to one of those things where statistically, it might make sense for a game to decide that, you have to take the second result. You took that risk, and you make that choice. If your result was low enough, you decide to do this thing and you will probably get a better result. But if you had a medium fine result and you decide to roll again, then you have to stick with, that risk that you took. And I understand that, but it is also one of those game design things that feels bad. If you roll a 1 or a 2 and then you roll a 1 or a 2 again, that feels bad. And it sucks to feel bad.
Yeah, you don't want your players to feel bad.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it statistically makes sense if everyone is like, oh.
Especially for like one-shots and things. With this being such a long game that life gets in the way of so often, you're not necessarily going to be getting to, like, the playtesters. Jeremy Crawford and the rest of them in these videos that they've been putting out keep saying, oh yeah, for the last 18 months I've been playing this fighter, it's really good, I really enjoy this new thing that we've got, this weapon mastery, whatever. And it's like, yeah, but also keep in mind when you're game designing that people don't play as often as you. People won't be playing 4, 5, 6 times a week. Yeah, people will sometimes be playing this once every month, and then life gets in the way after they've played 4 games. And so they might not get those features coming up as often as they will, like, regressing to the mean over time. You get to see this feature coming up a lot, but yeah, things like re-rolling your damage and rolling into a lower one, that might be the only time that session that comes up, and you re-rolled lower and had to keep the lower result.
And D&D and sort of D20 fantasy at large is so designed towards averages, which I just wonder whether it's maybe showing in this modern age of TTRPGs, where so many games are being designed explicitly for one-shot style play, whether we're starting to see a little bit of strain there because just the culture of gaming has shifted a little bit away from that constant regular play that lent itself to averages.
Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like tabletop RPGs is the only place. Board gaming, I don't think the social parameters around board gaming of, like, we only get to play this board game like once in a blue moon, and then it's really hard to get together to play this game again. But not in board gaming or war gaming, which is a bit different because war gaming is typically competitive by design. Yeah. Is there such a need to, like, protect the experience of any one person from ever feeling disappointed at the table? And that's what I kind of grate against a bit, is I'm like, look, disappointment's part of the risk reward, is part of playing the game.
I agree, and that's a thing that's coming up in the comments a lot as well. People saying like, oh no, the failing is part of it. It's not a risk unless you can feel bad. But I think what Dael and I were saying that is, if the feature is coming at a later level in your class or whatever, you finally get this class, or you take a feat or whatever that allows you, to use the same example we're using,
something to get it.
You spend something, or you get a resource, or some class feature gives you the ability to re-roll your damage. That's not where the risk and feeling bad thing comes in. That's like, you shouldn't, like Shawn was saying earlier, you're getting a thing that should be indicative of you're getting better at this thing, you're getting better at fighting, you're getting more consistent with your damage, and then you re-roll into lower damage, and you're like, well, now the dice are telling me I'm actually worse at this thing than I was a second ago. Which is where it comes in. And I still think that, yeah, absolutely, you should be able to fail at stuff. You should have hard monsters and go up against terrible things and have moments of disappointment. You should be able to, roll ones. But if you're taking a feature that allows you to re-roll, then that's the game telling you, oh, this is an evidence of you getting better at this thing.
Yeah. And it rarely comes up that it matters. It's only in this damage sort of area, because normally it's pass fail. It's either if you hit, you're not going to re-roll. If you miss, then it's fine. You re-roll.
Then taking the lower result doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. So
fair enough.
And actually, that's why I think it's such an interesting choice to have heroic inspiration apply to whatever dice you choose, because they really are very different systems. The system of rolling the D20 to determine, success failure versus the system of rolling a damage die. They feel really different. So it makes a difference there whether you have to keep the second roll or not. Because with damage, I don't think that should matter. I think you should be able to choose the higher one. It's like, whatever, you're rolling at the high end, like 2d6. It's kind of like, yeah, you could re-roll one of those die and keep the higher number. I don't think that's really going to matter when it seems from the information we've got that we're still dealing with bags of hit points as the bad guys. But it does make a difference being able to choose the higher and do the advantage thing with the D20. So,
yeah, I mean, and this is to say that heroic inspiration is not changing advantage as a mechanic, because advantage still exists.
Yeah, it's a separate
in terms of exactly, which I like because it adds a bit more texture to the game.
It'll be interesting to see how the heroic inspiration reroll works with the advantage as well. Do you reroll both? Do you just reroll the higher
I think
one?
they've said that you reroll one of them.
You just reroll one of them.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned, as part of the heroic inspiration, you also mentioned the changes in surprise. What do people feel about that in general?
See, this is interesting to me because, okay, for folks who aren't aware, there's been this whole saga of like confusion because there used to be surprise rounds.
Mm-hmm. No, they didn't. No, they didn't.
Yes.
No, they did. I'm going further back, Ben.
Right. Sorry.
There used to be surprise rounds, and that was a thing that DMs became very used to, and it worked in its own specific ways. And then 5e tried to simplify it by being like, "There's no surprise round. Now there is just the surprised condition." They love making things conditions. And so then a lot of people coming into 5e who had experience with D&D or similar fantasy D20 games were like, yes, the surprise round, and would try to run it the way that it used to work, but it didn't work that way anymore. And so then it would get confusing when it clashed against stuff like certain barbarian class features. And so then that became confusing. And what they've done now, I think, is basically go in the direction of it seems to me prioritizing new players and coming in and making it work in a way that seems fairly intuitive for someone who is just starting the game. It's like, they're surprised, so they are worse at this thing. And just forget the rounds, forget the condition, none of these weird little floating qualities that are going on. It's just this one thing that happens.
I definitely see the need to fix it from a mechanics point of view as well, because D&D is over in especially at higher levels. You can finish a fight so quickly if you have the advantage. It can turn the table. Like, balancing a fight in advance takes some real experience in running the game to know how quickly things can change. Because if all of the party happen to go first in the initiative order before any of the monsters get to act, suddenly it can turn the tide. And so having it before as like, you get an entire round of surprise, and then you also, if you happened to roll better than them again, you get 2 full turns on top of whatever was the triggering instigation anyway. So like, if the wizard threw a fireball, you do the fireball damage, then you roll initiative, and they're surprised, so then you get a round. You end up with like almost 2.5-3 turns of doing anything. And so I understand the need to be like, let's nerf that back. But giving them disadvantage on the initiative, I'm not sure is enough, because if you do set up an ambush and you do get the drop on somebody, and you're attacking something that is like, you're attacking a thieves guild, and everybody in there, all of the assassins that you're attacking, are going to have a high dexterity and maybe the alert feat or whatever. They've got high initiative anyway, especially if they're like swashbucklers and they can add their charisma to their initiatives. If you get the drop on someone and then don't go before them in the initiative order, it's not going to feel like you've...
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. I agree. The thing that I didn't like about how Surprise worked in 2014 was especially for the player the player as well, not necessarily the GM, but the player who was surprised and then rolled low on initiative.
Yes.
Because the monsters would get a turn, then half the party would get a turn, then the monsters would get another. Like, you were just waiting like, half an hour at best until your turn.
It comes down to the paralyzed and stunned and stuff. How that's fun for the players to apply to NPCs. It's not fun for the NPCs to apply to your players, because the DM gets to play 100 different bad guys. And if this one's stunned, so be it. I'll use these other goblins. But if the player gets stunned and is like, that's my whole round, I bet you basically played skip a turn on me, which is bad game design. Skip a turn in general is bad game design. You don't want part of your game design to be, don't play this game for the next 20 minutes. And so that is the same with low initiative. How I would have done, like, if I was designing the nerf on surprise, I would have just said, if you have the surprise condition, your initiative can't be above a 10. So you roll initiative as normal. If you roll above a 10, it drops to 10. And then and then you're more likely that you're going to go in the second half of the thing, but you're also guaranteeing that if you surprise somebody who's super dexterous and has a high initiative bonus, they're not going to still outweigh you.
Well, the one other thing I liked about how surprise did work was that if you were surprised, and this was a little thing, you couldn't use your reaction. And I believe if you weren't surprised but rolled lower initiative, you couldn't use your reaction until you had your turn. Maybe I'm making that bit up. But
you would still roll initiative even if you were surprised. when your
Right.
initiative passed, you didn't act, but you could then start using your reaction.
Using your reaction.
Yes.
And I liked that specific thing because it could interact with interrupting certain reaction-based abilities. One example of a feature that I friggin' love is the Highway Rider Rogue, I believe it's called, from the Grim Hollow Player's Guide, has Fast Draw, which allows them to use their reaction when initiative is rolled to make a free sneak attack, basically. And it's the pull out the gun and aim for the
they have
head.
a couple
and
different options of a thing that they can do.
You could
really
also
quick.
move and do some other things as well.
That's the interesting thing. There are some really interesting, cool pieces of class design that do get lost with this version of Surprise. There are really cool, especially rogue regularly features that come up that are based around that interaction with Surprise. That were genuinely awesome pieces of the design. The assassin gets a bunch of cool stuff.
Yeah.
There's all this awesome stuff that will be lost, but it was stuff that was specific to if you are playing this type of character.
Yeah.
So I think broadly this will likely have a net positive effect, but it is sad to see some of that awesome stuff disappear.
Can I say something to really upset all the gamist players and DMs out there? Don't even use initiative for your monsters, GMs. Put the monsters in the initiative order where it makes very cool narrative sense.
That's what I do.
And that fixes so many problems. Don't be punitive with it, right? Also, let the big, slow monsters go last. But the tricky, the wizard, the big boss who needs to get off their big thing to make the fight interesting.
Get off their monologue before they die.
Get off their monologue and their fireball.
Initiative.
Right. They go immediately, oh, look, I rolled a 20. And, they're +7. I don't know how that happened. But, they get to go there. It's so much better.
It's so real because if you find yourself like me when you're building a stat block for a monster or a homebrew monster and you're like, yes, initiative +14 or -9. If you find yourself doing that where you're trying to engineer the randomness to make them go at a certain point, just shove them in there. Just
shove them there. Just put them there.
Just shove them in there.
Just shove them in. I tend to do, especially if there's a battle where there's kind of this person's fighting over here, this person's fighting over here. I just do a retaliatory thing. So a wizard attacks that hobgoblin. Okay, then it's my turn. I just intersperse their order, my order, their order, my order. It's much more like the miniatures game Imperial Assault, Star Wars miniatures game.
Yeah.
Very good game. But that's how it works. The players choose who goes first in that game. The players choose one of them to go first, and then the bad guy gets to use one from his monsters. Then it's back to the players who wants to go next. Then it's back to me, and that's how I run my D&D game. Because then I'm not playing with myself for half an hour. And they're not waiting. They're not waiting for me to get through all of the monsters and getting all ganged up on by a million different goblins all getting to go at once. It's like you attack that guy, so he gets to attack you back. Now it's back to you guys in the initiative order. And then after they've gone through all 4 of them or 5 of them, whatever, then any of my bad guys that haven't gone at that point, all of them get to go before the end of the initiative order.
I am going to just dive into classes. I'm not going to pull out one specifically. Somebody tell me, what is your favorite or least favorite change that they've made to the classes they've talked about so far?
I am very happy as a rogue / fighter main. I'm actually really happy with where they've landed on the fighter. I had my doubts at times, but I've really come around on it. I think that what they've ended up landing on is something that is still fairly simple, but it leans more in the active tactical range, right? Instead of getting a feature that is passive, which is something that I've constantly complained about with the fighter, the champion gets this increase to their critical range. And it's like, that's nice, but I keep forgetting about it. Rob has run games for me where I've had character class features where I've just forgotten about it because it's some passive thing in the background I have to keep track of. But they've changed that kind of a thing for you got a critical hit and now you can move. You can choose to move half your speed wherever you want. And it's not going to proc opportunity attacks. And maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you do want to do that, but it gives you options and choices that you can make that are a little bit more active that I don't know. I'm really pleased with where it's gone, and even things like weapon mastery, which I didn't care about, that are so core to the fighter. I still don't care about it, but it doesn't feel like it's in my way. It doesn't feel like it's cluttering me with a bunch of choices. It's just, this is here if you want to engage with it. And I think a lot of people will want to engage with it.
I'm very, and that's the one thing I did want to talk about before classes, but I guess it's kind of interlinked, is weapon mastery. Because when I first was hearing about weapon mastery, you know, as a GM, it kind of sucks when your monsters are constantly getting pushed over, knocked off cliffs, moved around,
on every
stunned.
Attack, you can knock somebody over,
disadvantage.
make a save.
Yeah, exactly.
Like slow things down.
Initially, I was kind of like, oh, this seems a bit, but what I'm hoping it will do is provide tactical options to martial players and kind of get rid of a couple of tactics that I really didn't like. Yes, I'm talking to you, Stephen. You know who you are. Who would do things like the optimum play in a lot of combats became grapple, prone.
Push them prone.
Because there's no way that it is not worth it for a villain or a monster to try to get out of a grapple because they lose a whole turn doing that. And they have disadvantage on their attack rolls because they're prone. Everyone has advantage against them. Or grapple. Like the number of times this particular player, and I'm calling him out, has asked me, so is that a cliff there? Like, is that a ledge? Is that is that an edge? I just described recently how like they're fighting in this netherworld where there are rifts through time and space that create gaps in the floor, and these Cthulhian monsters that are kind of growing from the walls. And sure enough, he was like, is that a ledge there? Could I push him through that gap? I'm like, no, they're grown into the walls. They're literally attached. He's like, yeah, okay, yeah, all right, fair enough.
I think that wasn't helped by Baldur's Gate 3 having push as a bonus action.
Exactly.
Because it is one of the best tactical things to do. I've made an attack, I've done a bunch of damage, and I've got a bonus action. I'm not spending on anything else. I might as well try and shove him off of this cliff.
Yeah. So I'm hoping that GMs are going to start creating enclosed rooms everywhere. Ledgers will be a thing of the past in D&D.
Which, realistically, if you're having a big old fight, you probably don't want to fight on the edge of a cliff because of the risk of somebody throwing you off. That makes sense. What I like about the weapon mastery stuff is that it has finally differentiated the weapons. The weapons have always been a boring, homogenized mass of you might as well just pick a dice and then describe what weapon you're attacking with, rather than anything to do with weapons, because there's so many of them that have the same tags, the same whatever, the same reach, and do the same damage, and they're basically just reskins anyway. Whereas now the weapons have little tags with them. For anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, weapon mastery is all the weapons come with a tag. The dagger has the word Nick, the great axe has topple, I think, and the great axe has graze, maybe. The club has push, whatever it is. Each one of those things, if you're a martial class only, you get to use that tag, which I think is good as well because it's giving the marshals some power that the spellcasters don't, and I like that. But yeah, each of the weapons can do different things, push them back, knock them over, whatever. But you have to choose which weapon you're fighting with. What I don't like about it is the implication that a fighter with 4 attacks and then an action surge for another 4 attacks can attack with 8 different weapons, swapping between them after every attack.
Yeah, swapping weapons is going to be a big question for me, because they mentioned
this
that
thing
you
to
can
topple them over, and then I use this thing to get an extra attack.
Suddenly, those rules that have always existed for like how long it takes to draw a weapon, stow a weapon, suddenly those are going to be very important.
But my experience with those is that it's been pretty wishy-washy. I think it's something like...
That's what I'm saying. I think that they have never mattered before, and so no one's paid attention. I think they matter now, and a lot of people are going to start paying attention. I think it's going to actually become part of the action economy.
I hope so.
The funny thing is, I'm not sure if they're going to specifically say you can switch for free, because that's the implication of what Jeremy Crawford was saying when he was describing his fighter in the playtesting stage. He was like, oh yeah, I really enjoyed knocking somebody prone and then getting 2 attacks with my dagger. And so he was specifically talking about switching weapons mid attack. It's like, you're going to do all 8 different attacks with 8 different weapons in 6 seconds of combat.
Yeah.
And how long do combats last now? Is that a problem with the game for your group? If it's a problem now, multiply that by 3, and that's where you're going to be at. You may want to say, do we really want to put weapon mastery into our game?
Well, it when they first announced it, it felt like something that maybe was a little bit tacked on of like these extra things that every weapon can do. To be honest, the way they're talking about it now, it's starting to sound pretty core to like how a lot of different classes function and the benefits they get in how they can manipulate weapon mastery. So I'm not sure it's going to be something that's going to be part of the system that is easily ignorable.
And the question then becomes, what do monsters do? Your stat block for your barbarian, is that going to have a lot of pushing or proning or
is it one of those? Is it one of those where it's like, if you use it against me, I can use it against you kind of things from the DM?
Right. Because then multiply by 3 again the amount of time that it takes to get through a round of combat.
Yeah, we shall see. Because that's a very good question. I hadn't even considered, NPCs. They've talked a little bit about how the Monster Manual have an expanded NPC section, which I'm excited about because playing in Dark Fantasy, NPCs are kind of where I go to for a lot of my, street level battles as opposed to grisly monsters just wandering through the streets or forests. Right. But I'm very excited to get a closer look at the Monster Manual. That being said, we are very quickly running out of time here, so we better go. Check us out on Twitch at Ghostfire_official. We're here 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time every Monday, or it's Tuesday, 9 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. I've no idea. What's the time in New Zealand, Rob?
It's currently noon.
Okay, cool. So 11 Eastern Standard Time, I think, off the top of my head. Anyway, come check us out. Hang out. There's the chat, and you can ask questions and stuff. Rob,
there is one thing I want to say before we end all of this, and that is just to point out that we're all talking very sort of excitedly about the stuff that has been released by Wizards of the Coast regarding this 2024 version of the game. But let's all keep in mind, this is the stuff that they have released. Okay. Yeah. So even if we're all coming in and going, "Ooh, isn't this all great and positive?" Just bear in mind that they are selecting what they show us. That's all I want to say.
I've been very intentional. I've only listened to the videos that are on the DnD YouTube channel. I have not listened to any of the influencer videos.
Including kind of mine, Benjamin?
I put it on in the background. I gave it a like.
Thank you.
For that very reason, I'm sure I kind of, somebody pointed this out on Twitter. I can't remember who, but it is very much, yes, we can't get the facts without it being mixed in with opinion at the moment because it's either marketing or it's, someone on YouTube kind of presenting their thoughts on the thing for better or worse. So I think that's a very salient point, Dael. Where can folks find you, Rob, if they want to check you out?
You can find me at Robert Hartley GM, HARTLEY. Or if you're on Twitch, I'll say hello. That's my name. I stream on Twitch all the time doing Dungeons & Dragons content. Check me out there.
Go check it out. Go check out Viva La Dirt League as well. What's the Viva channel that you said was RPG specific?
Viva La Dirt League DnD. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. That being said, I've been Ben Byrne, here with Shawn Merwin, Dael Kingsmill, Robert Hartley, and we will be back next week for another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast and on YouTube for the super exciting news. And we will catch you then. Goodbye. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da. Ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da.
Hey!
Love it.
You're listening to Radio Lorecast.